You booked a show, congratulations. Now you have to figure out how to set up playback and your Apollo and backing track and click and all that stuff. Well, guess what? Today you're in luck because in this video I'm going to walk you through setting up everything you need to perform live, from your Apollo interface to Ableton Live to AutoTune. I'm going to walk you through everything, so grab a coffee, grab all your cables and your mic, and we're going to get right into it. I just want to introduce myself first. My name's Lucas. I'm a musician and music director based in Los Angeles, California. And I've worked with artists from first-time gigs all the way to headline touring acts. And I'm really excited to share some info with you today because I get questions about this all the time. The first thing that I just wanted to mention is that if you would like to download all of these templates that I'm using in this video, you can do that by following the link in the description to my website, and for a small donation you can start exactly how I have my Ableton Setup right now, which will save you a ton of time. And if you find this video useful or helpful or not, definitely consider leaving a comment and subscribe to my channel to check out some of my other videos and some future videos I'm going to be posting that are going to be just like this. So I'm going to break this video into 3 sections. The first section is going to be setting up your Apollo and Universal Audio console. The second section is going to be setting up Ableton, and the final section is going to be setting up AutoTune. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually walk you through all the ports on your Universal Audio interface and basically explain the different cables and things that you need to connect, because that's going to be the first step in this whole process. I'm going to start with the back panel first. So here we have 2 combi inputs. So these accept XLR cables, which will connect to microphones, and they will also accept 1/4 inch cables, which will come in 2 categories. There's either going to be an instrument cable, which connects to guitars and basses, or there's going to be a balanced 1/4 inch TRS cable, which connects to keyboards and other power devices like that. But for right now, I'm going to assume that you're going to be connecting 1 XLR cable from your microphone into mic line 1, and then this is available for whatever other instruments you may need to connect. These are the 2 inputs on the back. The next connections are going to be outputs. So we have monitor left and right. So I like to consider this as like your output 1 and 2. And these are balanced 1/4 inch TRS connections. For a live context, you will be connecting this to the front of house or to the mixer that will go to the PA system that the audience will be hearing. And then you also have line out 3 and 4, which are 2 additional outputs that are also 1/4 inch TRS, so you can use to output whatever you want. So you can output click, you could output backing tracks, vocals, and so on. So we'll get into more detail about that. Next, I'm going to go through the front of the interface, which actually has some really important connections. So the first one, this is a headphone jack. So this connects to a 1/4 inch stereo headphone cable. So you can use this to monitor yourself if you would like to use in-ear monitors. And then right over here, we have an instrument input. So this connects to 1/4 inch instrument cable as well. So once you've got what you need set up and connected to your interface, now we're actually going to have to do a step that a lot of people overlook that causes a ton of confusion. This isn't going to be a comprehensive tutorial on console. I already have that actually on my channel if you need to learn how to use it, so go check that out. I'm going to show you how to set up a live set. We're going to go to the bottom and click settings, and there's a couple panels here that we're going to need to work with, but the main one that I want to focus on right now is going to be this I/O matrix. So depending on the model of the Apollo that you have, you may have a lot less inputs available here. So on the left column we have all of our inputs, and on the right column we have all of our outputs. So what you need to do here is you need to assign the inputs and name them so you can remember what they are. So for example, for channel 1 on my inputs, I would like that to be mic line high Z1, which just means your mic line or guitar input 1. And you can click on that or set it to whatever else you need, and then you can name it here. And then for number 2, we're going to do mic line 2, and I just have the name set to default, right? So depending on your setup and how many inputs your interface has, you need to make sure this is assigned correctly. Same thing goes for your outputs. So for channel 1, my output is monitor left, which is that first output that we talked about, and monitor right is my second. And then after that, I have line 1, line 2, line 3, and so on and so forth. The headphone jack is referred to as Q in the Apollo ecosystem. So the assignment for your headphone jack is going to be Q1 left and Q1 right. So I have that set up down here for myself, but if you're using a smaller interface, it'll probably be one of the first things that you'll assign. So this is the I/O matrix. You need to make sure that you have everything assigned for anything that you need to plug in, and I would get rid of anything that you're not going to be plugging in. The next step is, once you have that set up, we need to actually set up this mixer so that it has everything that we need. If we have tracks that we're not using, you can actually right click and click hide, and it will disappear. I recommend hiding everything you're not using, because when you're playing live, you don't need extra clutter on the set. And additionally, I would actually recommend labeling every single thing so you know exactly what it is. So I have my vocals on my first channel. And another quick thing that you probably need to know about is if you press menu and you hit view, you can click show hide inputs, so that will show you the ones that you have hidden, just so you can go through everything and you can get rid of stuff that you don't need. For example, if I show hide inputs, I have all these virtual inputs hidden, so you can toggle them on and off as needed, and then when you're done, you click done. Now the very last thing that I just want to set up, click this Q output. So remember, Q refers to our headphone outputs, and I just wanted to make sure that you have mirror to output set to none for all of these, because we're going to be using Ableton to route our cues, not console. So we don't want any of these line outs being occupied. And now we're going to move on to Ableton. All right, so in Ableton, the first thing that we actually need to do is we also need to set up all of our inputs and outputs, kind of similar to how we did it in console. What you're gonna do is you're gonna press Command comma, which is the hotkey to open up preferences. And you're gonna go to this button right here. So we're under audio and we're gonna go to channel configuration, input config. So this is where you're gonna set up and name the exact inputs that you're gonna be plugging into your interface. So my setup has a lot of stuff. Chances are for your live set, you're really only gonna have vocals or guitar or a couple things. So what I would suggest doing is, first of all, disable any of the buttons for stuff that you're not gonna be using for any of these inputs. So we can do mono input vocals for number 1, and then you can disable anything else that you're not using. And if you're using any stereo inputs, like for example for a keyboard or something, you can set that up over here. But for the most part, one singer is gonna be mono, so we'll do vocals as 1. And then if you have bass or guitar or anything else plugged into your interface, you can do those over here in mono as well. And when you're done, click OK. And then similarly, we have to do the same thing for outputs. So this is pretty much the same layout. So we have all of our mono outputs on the left and stereo outputs on the right. So if you're running stereo tracks, like backing tracks, I would recommend setting that up on 1/2. So we can do 2 channels of stereo backing tracks, and you can label this tracks. But if you have mono outputs, which you should for your vocal, we can do mono 3. We can label this vocals, and then uncheck or deselect any of the ones that you're not using so you don't get confused, and just make sure that the ones that you are using are properly labeled so that there's no confusion. And then when you're done, you hit OK. And I'll just make one quick comment about buffer size and latency. I would recommend running this at 128. I think that's pretty stable for Ableton. I run my sessions at 48K, but there's a bunch of different options, and you can read more about that online. And it will actually change your overall latency as well. So it's good to know that if you bump this up, your latency will go down, but it will use up much more CPU. And for the buffer size, we probably want this as low as possible, but not too low so that your computer does not crash or have pops and clicks while you're performing. So that's it for preferences right now. Under this group right here, I have my guide tracks, and it has 4 different things. The first one is click. So I've created a separate metronome, essentially, so we're not using the Ableton click here. The reason is because this doesn't give me as much routing flexibility, so I create my own click track, which would allow me to route it at different volumes to different band members. If someone doesn't want click and other people want it loud, that's no problem, but we just have to create a click track. So this is all in my template. What I did is I created a rack that basically has the Ableton click sound sampled in a drum rack, and I just mapped some macros. It looks a little crazy because what I did is I went one step further and actually programmed a bunch of different subdivisions, so you can actually adjust the level of the downbeats and add 8th notes or 16th notes if people want a higher resolution click. So that's our click track. The next track that you're going to want to have is just a regular audio track assigned to your microphone for your set list. And this is something that you're gonna have to do yourself. You're gonna have to record yourself saying the song tracks. This is also assuming that you plan on using in-ear monitors, and if you don't want to have like a printed out set list sheet, what you can actually do is you can record yourself saying the names of the songs that you're playing, and you can actually put those right before the song so that everyone in the band knows what song you're playing. So that's what the set list is for. There's nothing there right now because I don't know what songs that you're playing. The next one is count off. Basically what I use this for is to add count offs as well as label certain sections in songs that are happening, like bridge, post-chorus, whatever, so that no one forgets if there's like a break or whatever. So what you actually do is you program MIDI here for any of these. 1, 2, 3, 4.
outro, solo, vocals, guitar.
So I recorded my voice obviously and mapped it out for certain things that I feel like would be very useful. Those would normally be just routed to people's in-ear monitors, so they would just hear, the section or the count off or whatever you need. And the last thing is the key, and this would only be used for AutoTune UAD version, which we will get into a little bit later. So if you're not using UAD AutoTune, you don't need this, but sometimes I'll actually just write the key on a per song basis just so I have it written down in a few different places just in case anything goes wrong. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna show you the process of importing songs. If you download this template, I have a couple files. So I have the song one, and then we also have the show. So this is for the full live set. So you'll see how this works in a second. So what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be importing the stems to a special project just for a song. We'll import the stems for the second song to a special project just for the second song, and then we're actually gonna import the session files from those Ableton sessions into the master show track, and I'll show you why it makes a lot of sense to do it that way, because it gives you the most amount of flexibility that you can have. So right now I'm on the song 1 BPM key, so I haven't labeled this obviously. For the purpose of this video, I'm not going to, but this is for you to label for your own songs. So these are my demo stems, and if you're printing down stems for your own projects, you have plenty of control over how you do this. I recommend doing grouped stems. So we would essentially put our background vocals in one group, bounce that out, all our drums together, all our guitars, and so on. So if you need to hit up your mix engineer or your producer for that, just ask them for grouped stems. And I like to have it very organized, so we have the BPM and the key in all the files. Okay, so I'm gonna hold Shift, select all 4 of these stems, drag them into Ableton, hold down Command, and then let go of the mouse, and it's gonna put them in different tracks. I recommend labeling everything perfectly just from the beginning because you don't want there to be confusion. We're gonna hold down Shift, select all of these, group them, the song 1, 74 BPM, and F minor. I like having the key and the BPM written in multiple different places just in case anything goes wrong. It's right there. We'll color code this and we can do assign track color, so group tracks and click. So here we go. The tempo 74 BPM, so I'm gonna put 74 here. You can add a little bit more time before so that everyone can get ready. So it would be like song name and then it'd be 1, 2, 3, 4 count in, and then everyone would start playing. You'll see later on that click tracks in a large live set when we have a bunch of songs, automating tempos and all that is not the move because it gets really confusing with automation in Ableton and it's just a bunch of extra work. So I'm just gonna show you one quick workaround. And what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna duplicate this click track, and I'm gonna right click it and hit freeze track. And then I'm gonna right click it again and hit flatten track. So what this does is it bounces an audio version of our click. We can actually set this to lead, which will actually override the tempo. So we actually don't even really need to have this playing anything because we already have the MIDI click. But basically what happens is Ableton's gonna look at this audio file as the leader in the session to tell it what tempo everything's happening at. And so when we have multiple songs going on, you don't need to be doing tempo automation. So if you weren't aware, the tempo automation is down here in Ableton. So we would press A on the keyboard, go to automation and song tempo. And it's just really annoying to have this little slider here. When you have a set with a lot of songs, it can get really confusing to have the slider. So once you hit lead here, it actually overrides the normal click in Ableton, and it will use whatever tempo is here. Now the next question is like, well, what if your song has like automation or anything like that? So what you would actually do is before you bounce this click, you would actually have to, in this song 1 project file, do the tempo adjustment, and then you can bounce the click and it will be printed down into the lead track that you're using. So it's actually pretty easy. It's not too bad, but I really don't like doing this automation in Ableton. For the most part, like unless you're playing really complicated music, a lot of it, like for hip hop and pop, is going to be at a consistent tempo, but there might be slowdowns, there might be tempo changes. So in your song project file, just map out the tempo changes using the master track here, duplicate the click like I showed you, print it down, and then set it to lead, and it will program those tempo changes in. We save, we go to File, Collect All, and Save, and hit OK. So we got the 2 songs set up. Now we're ready to assemble the show. All right, so now I've opened up the main show Ableton live set, and this is all empty. And then we have vocals right here, which we'll get into. But if you open up current project right here, it'll show you the other live sets that are in this folder. So we're gonna go to song 1 and grab those groups. So the first thing I'll do is I'll unfold my guide tracks and just grab these and cut and paste them in the same place that we want. so we can get rid of those old guide tracks. Now they're all here. Okay, now they're all here, and as you can see, the tempo track is actually overriding our click in Ableton, so that's what we want, so that's awesome. So our guide tracks are good. And then here's our stems. So that's gonna be song 1, and I'll put a marker right here so we can do song 1, and it's 74 BPM. Okay, so now I'm just gonna do the same thing I did for song 1, but for song 2, so you see how this makes things a lot easier. And we just drag these in, grab all of this, move it to where we want in the session. And then like we did earlier, we can grab these, hit Command X to cut them, Command V to paste them. So the guide tracks are good. We can erase this. Now we have song number 2 over here. We can add a marker. So now as you can see with the tempo tracks that I've created, it's actually muted. It's not going to play any audio because the click's going to play audio, but it's essentially acting as our tempo leader, so that anytime you go to this track in the timeline, it's actually automating the tempo on its own without having to do all this clunky master automation here that we really don't want to have in our final live set, because it's really confusing, and if you're moving stuff around, it gets messed up. If you're starting out, that could also be a good option for you too. So I just want to make sure you know if you press A, it does open up automation. You can manually automate the tempos there. So this whole click guide track, actually we really should name these tempo. And so I'll put 74 BPM for this one, just so it's written down clearly. These tempo track things really confuse me at first. Once you do it a couple times, you'll realize that it's the way to go for this task. Okay, so I've pressed tab to go to mixer view, and I'm just gonna talk briefly about routing that you need to understand in Ableton. So for all of the outputs on the back of your Apollo, you can route specific things to it. So my suggestion would be for 1 and 2, we can do our tracks, and maybe for 3, we'll do our vocals that's running through the AutoTune. And then if you have any additional outputs, you can use those as Q outs, or for example, the headphone jacks on the front of the Apollo, you can use those as dedicated Q mix. But first, the main thing that we need to do is our guide tracks. We don't want the audience to hear that, so we would send this to AutoTune sends only. So these guide tracks are not being routed to any outputs unless you bump up the sends volume to a specific headphone mix. Similarly for these songs, we want the tracks going to master, because we're doing master out to 1 and 2. And the vocals we're gonna wanna do, make sure it's set to the right microphone, and then you're gonna do external out, and we'll set this to whichever one you wanna use, but for me, I'll probably do 3. If I was using an Apollo Twin, we would probably do tracks 1 and 2 and then vocals out to 3, but that depends on your setup. And then you can adjust the level of specific things to go to the Q mixes. So to set up a Q mix, we can right click and hit insert return track, and I've labeled it by the bandmate's name. And these are going out to 2 separate headphone outputs. And so anything that they want to hear, you can add. So for example, we can just grab, like, for example, for my headphone mix, I'll probably want to hear everything at a fairly equal volume just to start out with, and then if I need more guitar, more click or whatever, we can adjust that to taste. And I would go to guide tracks too, and I'll probably want a lot of click, so I'm going to boost the click there on B. So that's how you adjust your headphone mixes, which I think is really cool. So remember, we went over this sends only feature, so that's really cool. You only want the actual stems of your songs going out to master, and you want your vocals going out to your separate output, and then our Q mixes, or our headphone mixes, are going out to external outputs. And then our master is going out 1 and 2, or whichever one you decide to use for your tracks. And our Q out we're actually not using, but just in case, I want you to set this to something different than the main output, because that's where your Ableton metronome is going to be routed to, but we're not using that. And one last thing that I just wanted to mention is that collect all and save is what you want to do before you move this to another computer or put it on Dropbox or anything. That will collect all the stems audio files and put them into the Ableton folder that you're using. For AutoTune, we have 2 basic options. You can either use AutoTune natively, which means that it runs on your computer in the Ableton session, or you use AutoTune Realtime UAD, which runs off the DSP on your UAD interface. So just a quick explanation of why you would use either. If you have the money to buy the UAD version and you're a really serious gigging artist, I would recommend getting the UAD version because it is going to have the lowest amount of latency possible, and I just think it's the best route if you are gigging. But if you're a producer, or want to subscribe to AutoTune so that you have like a little bit less of a cost going into it. I don't recommend subscriptions in general, but AutoTune is pretty expensive, and if you want to just kind of get started, you can totally use AutoTune natively, which means it just runs in Ableton. So it's going to use your computer CPU, but I think it's very stable and you can get pretty low latency, so I think that's a great option as well. Within both categories, there's some different versions. So within AutoTune native, there's AutoTune Pro, AutoTune EFX, and all those things at the time of this video, at least. So go to their website, check out the different versions, and figure out which one would fit your style. The AutoTune Pro, can give you sort of a more natural, realistic sound, and it has a lot more knobs. Whereas the EFX kind of is more simple. You can put the notes in the keyboard, and it does like a hard tune effect that works well. Same thing with the UAD versions. There's two different versions. There's the advanced one and the normal real time. So figure out which version works for you and fits your budget. So that's kind of a starting point on that. I'm going to explain to you how to set up both the native and the DSP versions. It can be a little bit harder to set up and a little more confusing for most people to set up the Universal Audio Apollo AutoTune version, but I think it'd be really cool to have a video that explains both so you can kind of suss out those options and see what fits your needs best. So we're going to start with the native version because I think that's going to be easier to use. I didn't mention this, but I actually included in the template my vocal channel, which I think has some really cool presets to help get your vocal sound pretty polished. But what we're going to do is we're going to go to our plugins, and assuming you've already downloaded and installed AutoTune properly, you can load AutoTune. So for this example, I'm going to use EFX. I think that one works pretty well for live. And I'm gonna drag it in before anything on our vocal chain. The first thing you need to do is go to this cog wheel settings button and make sure low latency is checked. And I like to recheck it again before anything, any rehearsal or gigs, just in case, because sometimes that can get messed up. So in Ableton, what we can do, here's our set list, just like before. If we pressed A on the keyboard, it shows you your automation, and we'll create a lane. For AutoTune EFX, we'll do the key, press the plus sign to bust that down. We could also do device on. I think that's really useful. So if you're talking, there won't be AutoTune. So in these lanes, what you would do is you would set the key. So we know this song is in F minor. So I'll do F. For me, low male, F minor. We'll have device on when it starts the song, device off in between songs. I'm going through this a little bit faster than what I would normally do. I would normally test everything out. But when the song's on, the device is on. When the song's off, device is off. And then we have the key here. So we're gonna do F here. And then when the song goes to A minor for this other song, we're gonna grab this region, and you can grab this and put it to A. So now AutoTune will automatically, so if we look at this, when you change your location in the timeline, it switches keys by itself. To me, this is a little bit easier to understand as a new performer because your timeline in Ableton, or your arrangement view rather, is gonna have all of these automations in it, and I think that works really well. So you can do this with EFX, you can use AutoTune Pro. So let's say you're really trying to do this right and you want to use the AutoTune real-time version. What you're going to do to set this up, to set the automation up, is we're actually going to use the key track that I created for my template under the guide tracks. The keys are going to be automated using this, and this actually works a little bit different. So it's going to be using MIDI continuous control messages. You're going to go to Audio MIDI Setup, so you might have to press Command Spacebar and search for it to get this to pop up. So this is a really important window for setting up audio devices and MIDI devices on Mac. And at the top, go to Window and then Show MIDI Studio, and this window will pop up. So right at the top bar, you go to Window and Show MIDI Studio, and you're going to click this IAC driver. So the IAC driver is an internal MIDI driver that we're going to use to send messages from Ableton to console to change parameters in AutoTune. And what you're going to do is you're going to make sure it says devices online, that turns the device on, and you're going to add one channel and just name it UAD MIDI and hit apply, and then exit out of all this. And you're gonna have to restart Ableton, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna go to command comma, which opens up preferences, go to MIDI. Assuming you've restarted Ableton, it will display this new IAC UAD MIDI driver, and all you need to check is out track. So we're only sending MIDI output information to the UAD driver, so that's the only thing we need to enable. Next thing is let's set it up in UAD real quick. So what you're gonna do is you have to go to this settings button one more time. We're gonna go to MIDI and make sure your device is IAC driver UAD MIDI. So that's the first step. So this is the AutoTune Realtime Advanced model. So it's kind of like the AutoTune Pro. So you can see both of those, and you're gonna go to the cog wheel here and you're gonna go to preferences, and then there's a MIDI control panel. So now this is important. We needed to decide which parameters we're going to be automating. So for the purpose of keeping this video somewhat simple, I'm only gonna do key, and what you do is you assign a number. So it's just a MIDI continuous control port. You just think of it as like a virtual connection. And so I assigned key to 20, and I'll show you why. I'll hit save. And what I'll do is I'll actually just go back into Ableton, and there's one other thing that we need to set in Ableton that's really important. So for this key lane, we need to make sure that this is outputting information to that IAC driver right here. So instead of no output, you click IAC driver. And now we're gonna be in business. So what you do is you double click the MIDI clip for whichever song you're working on. You need to go to envelopes, and then you go to MIDI control, and then you go to the number that you've assigned it to. So I assigned the key to 20, and now when I move this around, it's going to move the key using this envelope or automation. Basically, we can change the key, right? So we're gonna want to put this in F minor. So the reason why I really say that this is one step further and a bit more complicated for people that are newer to gigging is obviously you have to set up all that MIDI CC stuff, and you're also going to need to set up a few different lanes for any parameters that you may need to change. So you might be changing key, you might be changing the retune speed for different songs. You're just gonna have to set up a bunch of different MIDI tracks like this, all going out to the IAC driver using the CC channel that you defined. So I hope that makes sense. I think it's really powerful. I think it's a great way to go. You just have to spend a little bit more time setting all that up, and it's not directly in Ableton, so you're gonna be switching between windows. I hope this video was really helpful. Definitely let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to check out my future videos on similar topics. And I'll have the link in the description to download the template, which I think would be really helpful to save a bunch of time so you can start with what I started with. And also, if you need more personalized kind of one-on-one help putting together your live set, definitely don't hesitate to reach out through the contact form on my website. I would love to work with you. And I hope you all have a great show, and I'll catch you in the next video. Take it easy.